Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, the mobile app. You can also watch us on YouTube. He's Marc Malusis. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. Multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. Give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on social media using hashtag Giants Chat. He is at Marc Malusis, one word. I'm at Lance Medow, one word as well.
Nice.
Last name Medow. He's Mark with a C, for those of you counting the spelling at home. See, I'm very specific.
Very.
When I am in this seat.
You're an NYU guy. I don't expect anything else.
You know, Violet Pride. We got to make sure that the ABCs are followed accordingly, Moose. Well, listen, it's good to share the set with you here.
No doubt.
For the first time.
You do a great job.
Absolutely. Well, likewise, looking forward to having a good conversation on many fronts. This is the best time, in my opinion, to be hosting a Giants-related program, given all of the free agency movement. So Moose and I will take you through the ins and outs. Some have been official. Others are pending physical. So you may hear us say that time and time again throughout the course of this program. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. We're also broadcasting from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. So Jermaine Illuminor just spoke to the media. Moose and I were listening in on that. We'll give you our thoughts in terms of the offensive line and what the Giants have done from that standpoint. I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
Because Illuminor was one of what I considered, Moose, the three key free agents that were out there on the market. Wan'Dale Robinson, Cordell Flott, of course, being the other two, and those two players are joining Brian Daboll in Tennessee. So Jermaine Illuminor, and I was on with Schmelk last week, and my order of priority was Illuminor number one, Flott number two, Robinson number three. I thought the one guy they couldn't afford to lose was Illuminor, mainly because of how far this offensive line has come and also what it would cost you and maybe the lack of substance at the right tackle position in the event that Illuminor walked.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's a fair assessment. Robinson coming off a career year. Flott, obviously, Giants were interested, obviously, in both those other players as well. But to in a salary cap world, to a price, and both of them obviously signed with Saleh, Daboll, and the Tennessee Titans. When you look at Illuminor, everything that you mentioned, I mean, Lance, for too long here, the offensive line for the New York Giants, really since 2011, the last time they won a Super Bowl, has been a big-time talking point. And you've had different brain trusts come through this very building and try and resolve it, different coaching staffs, different draft choices, different free agent signings, all of that. Before, you were able to kind of talk about a Giants game, win or loss, where the offensive line wasn't one of the main talking points this past year, and it wasn't. And Illuminor is one of the reasons why. Obviously, if you're going to think about, offensive lines in the National Football League, or you think about productive offenses, it always starts up front, right? I used to do a show on WFAN with David Deal before he headed into the coaching ranks with Memphis, and he used to always talk about the mantra for O-linemen we are the reason, right? So when you look at Illuminor, I wouldn't disagree with you in terms of the priority at the top of the list for Joe Schoen and company going into this offseason was to make sure their right tackle was back. I was surprised about the contract in terms of it being not as large as I thought it would be, given off the year that Jermaine Illuminor had this past season with the New York Giants. But, yeah, it was a top priority because the offensive line is a big-time priority. You want to run it. You want to make sure you protect your second-year franchise quarterback in Jackson Dart. You want to be an efficient offense. Well, you better have an offensive line that has a good understanding of what they're doing. And to keep a group together for most part, you build up that chemistry year in and year out instead of being in a constant state of change.
Well, I'm glad you went there, Moose, because let's piggyback off of that point. As it stands right now, they're in position to potentially bring back 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen from left to right: Andrew Thomas, John Runyon, John Michael Schmitz, and then Illuminor at right tackle. Greg Van Roten is still a free agent. Yep. Possibility remains that he could return, so they could be talking about full continuity. They did re-sign, and this is official, Evan Neal, which I think was a surprising development on many different fronts. We had a lot of conversations on this show, and my mindset was, and I was looking at it more from Evan Neal's lens, the fact that at this stage in his career, especially with a new coaching staff coming in, that perhaps he would want a fresh slate, meaning he'd want to go elsewhere, get an opportunity to compete, get a different perspective. Now, the Giants, they do have new voices, they have new eyes in terms of the coaching staff, but I thought it was more on Neal not necessarily what the Giants wanted, and they came to an agreement on a 1-year contract, and Neal is going to be back into the mix. Now, it's still a prove-it situation, Moose, for him, okay? Let's not be naive here. We're still at the stage where there's going to be a 90-man roster, and the 51 at this stage count towards the salary cap before the start of the regular season. So all of these transactions they make, especially with what I would consider complementary pieces and no guarantee to be a starter, still need to prove that they warrant a roster spot. So Neal's coming back, but this is still very the early stages as to what his potential role could be with this new Harbaugh regime.
Right, and no one's making any declarations. You throw in, Marcus, but to the Neal stuff, I think it's interesting from, and I wouldn't disagree with your assessment, Lance, going into this free agency period, right? But if you're Evan Neal, there's no other way to cut it. He's been a massive disappointment since being a high draft choice by the New York Giants coming out of Alabama, and that's underselling it a little bit, right? So. But here's the one thing that would maybe open up the eye that I didn't really think about until the deal came down and people were surprised by it. There is a connection in terms of the investment that was made by Joe Schoen in Evan Neal early on, right?
Yep.
And now, as you mentioned, you have different eyes, right? You have a new head coach, you have a new offensive line coach, you have a new offensive staff. It's a little bit different. Maybe it's a case where Evan Neal can potentially go out there and move inside. It's a 1-year contract. It's not a huge financial commitment. You're looking for options. He's still physically talented, right? He's still a mountain of a young man. He still was very, very talented to be a star at the University of Alabama. It's been a while since we've seen that caliber of player. And what's the hurt and the risk? Right? If you're the gamble, right? Because of the idea of if he goes on, latches on with another team, that general manager didn't draft him. There's no emotional investment. There's no emotional commitment. There's none of that whatsoever. The Giants did draft him. He's familiar with this building, familiar with this organization, but now you've got a new coaching staff. You've got a new offensive line coach. So now, you know what? You have a new opportunity here. And if he uses this 1 year to go out there, and stays relatively healthy, who knows? I'm not telling you that he's going to end up being the starting guard for the New York Giants, but he's looking to try and revitalize his career as best as he can. And he probably looked at it and said, staying here maybe gives me the best opportunity of being able to do that.
Well, and I'm sure also the pathway perhaps to legitimately compete for a starting job, right?
No
was
doubt.
A selling point because until Van Roden or somebody else with a resume where you say, okay, hey, he's probably going to be in line to be the main guy, then Neal, I'm sure, is saying to himself, all right, at least the window is still somewhat open. And here's the other thing that maybe gets lost in translation a bit, Moose. Evan Neal was making the transition to guard last season. The problem was he was a healthy scratch. He was inactive, and then he went on IR. So the sample size to even evaluate him as what he could potentially do sliding inside is non-existent at this point.
No, you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
No, you haven't seen it, but you've seen tackles in the past be able to go inside. And you've seen it at times because physically, Lance, you look at it, whether their arms are a little short, and maybe it'd be, you've seen it in college, you've seen it in the National Football League, and ultimately, I saw a tweet from Carl Banks yesterday, or maybe it was earlier this morning, that he sent out saying, he's rooting for the young man, harkens back to early on in training camp in 25, where he was impressing people with the way that he was playing at that guard position. So we'll see. Listen, I think for most Giant fans that are watching us right now, Lance, are probably looking at it and saying, kind of pie in the sky kind of stuff. It's not. It's worth the 1 year gamble if you're the New York Giants. It really is, because maybe, just maybe, all of a sudden Evan Neal finds it and he becomes the player, and this time on the interior that the Giants had hoped. And if he doesn't, you know what? It doesn't really cost you all that much.
Yeah, we're talking about a minimum contract. It's not a hefty investment that's going to now prevent you from pursuing
You're looking
other
at
plans.
options.
Yeah.
You're looking to try and find options because, as you mentioned, right now as it stands, 4/5 of the offensive line is conceivably back, right? And then you're looking for that spot that's going to play along Jermaine Illuminor on that right guard spot. And we'll see if Van Roten is back, right? I believe Van Roten was also at the introductory press conference for John Harbaugh as well. So we'll see if Van Roten is back, or we'll see exactly where the Giants decide to do as an organization after this free agency period is going, because we're early on here. We're in the infancy, right? We're a couple days out here with free agency. You still have the draft process to play out. You're going to get another run of veteran free agents and cuts and stuff like that to see exactly who shakes free. Then you go through the undrafted free agents. So, I mean, we're early on in this process, Lance, but the Giants are looking to present themselves as a team with some options. And also, as we've seen time and time again, in such a physical sport, you want to have some quality depth, too.
And Van Roten, remember, came in very late when he joined the Giants. So it's possible a lot of these players, I mean, I'll even go back to, I remember when Brett Favre was traded. I mean, he'd wait to get off the plane.
I was on my honeymoon.
Right? Okay, there you go.
I was in Hawaii.
He would do it. See, we're really digging into the archives
here. News. That's it. My wife was like, what are we doing? Don, I love you, but I got to watch this.
Hey, come on. There's priorities here in the sports world. I got to be caught up in terms of what's going on across the NFL landscape. I didn't know I was going to perhaps resonate from that standpoint. That's something. Who knew? But in all seriousness, we've seen a lot of polished veterans. They don't want to go through the grind of OTAs. They don't want to be here during the spring process, and they wait till the start of training camp midway, and they join a team. So what I'm emphasizing about Moose is that those of you who are still maybe somewhat surprised about Evan Neal coming back, it's not signed in blood that he's going to be a starter. There's no guarantee he's going to have a roster spot. It's another guy you bring in, you compete, and you see how the cards play out. And there's at least familiarity, to your point, with respect to the organization. And that was another thing, by the way, that I wanted to add on with Illuminor. Jermaine started his career with Baltimore.
Yep.
Not to say that Harbaugh had to be convinced, but John already knew about at least Illuminor and his pathway and how hard he's worked going from a player that was rotated in, moved from organization to organizations, played multiple spots, and now has solidified himself as a high-caliber starting right tackle. So I'm sure that established relationship helped in terms of when Joe Shane and the front office at least laid out what perhaps their priorities were.
Yeah, no doubt. And listen, I think, Lance, just as the fan base that's watching us right now and the tri-state area all across the country are excited about the Giants and the new beginning here with John Harbaugh, I think players are just as excited as well. When the introductory presser, when Harbaugh got introduced, talking about it's going to be about football. If it's not about football, this is not going to be the right organization for you. Jameis and company, convincing players on offense. I think Tyrone Tracy was one of them. You better be here for it. I think it'd be a good idea if you're here for it. And more than just a handful of players were here at that introductory presser. I think there is an excitement, and you mentioned about the familiarity, and every pathway in the National Football League is a little bit different. Not one and the same, right? And so you look at the way that Illuminor, came here and has shown himself and talked himself up before the start of free agency. I think he did an interview, I think it was with Paul Schwartz in the New York Post, saying he's the best right tackle in the National Football League. You thought that there was maybe a team that was going to go out there and, blow him away with an offer. He got paid really well, but he didn't get overpaid here to be a New York Giant. And I think there's an excitement from Jermaine listening to him before we hopped on the airwaves this afternoon, Lance. I think there's an excitement with him being back here, familiar with the organization, and really coming off a year in which he probably played one of his best seasons in the National Football League as well. But I'm talking about the fact of his pathway is not one and the same. It took some time for him to be able to find himself in the NFL and go through the ups and the downs and the physical challenges, the mental challenges, to now all of a sudden he's blossoming as a really good starting right tackle.
Yeah, he did not earn a consistent starting job until 2022 when he joined the Raiders. He started all 17 games that season, coincided with him joining with Carmen Bracillo, and then they came over here with respect to the Giants, and last 2 years he's played 15, 16 games respectively. I would agree with your sentiment. I think that this is a player, I don't like the cliched phrase, the hometown discount. I don't think it was necessarily that.
No.
But I do think that he's built a relationship with the organization. I think his family is comfortable in the area. And I think that he likes the fact that the team valued him, gave him a starting job coming off, even after his Raiders stint. I think there were still question marks about, is he a legitimate everyday right tackle or is he a guard, because he moved back and forth. And if you're comfortable and you like your surroundings, you ask most football players, that does hold value. How that equates financially, Moose, that is going to vary from player to player, but I think that did play a role in at least his thought process.
Yeah, and to some it doesn't. Right? To some players, they're going to look at it and say, I want every single last dollar that's coming my way. To others, that there is an intrinsic value. And now, what do you calculate it to? How much money do you, I mean, we're talking about, numbers that you and I, Lance, can only dream of, right? With the amount of money. And I give them all credit, right? We're out there to watch these guys go out there and compete, and they're elite level athletes. So I think Illuminor, looking at the situation, even if there was a better financial package with Harbaugh stepping in, with the fact that Jackson Dart is going into year 2, the fact that you've got Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, the confidence level in this coaching staff, I think there's an excitement that, this Giant team is going to turn it around pretty quick. And so I think if you're Jermaine Illuminor, with familiarity, you've seen a lot of losing over the course of your career, you have, that you'd like to latch on to this. And there's a great familiarity with the program and the regime, even with a change in offensive line coach and a change in head coach. You're familiar and confident in the organization on the whole.
One last thing I want to get to before we open up the phone lines, and it's related to what you just hit on. There seems to be, at least my takeaway from the direction in which the Giants went in free agency, and few names that we may throw out here. Remember, it's pending a physical, such as an Isaiah Likely and a Patrick Ricard, who are rejoining, according to reports, Harbaugh from Baltimore. But you look at that, you look at them bringing back Illuminor, pounding the football. And I think you were hitting a little bit on this with respect to the running backs and Cam Scatterbu hopefully returning to full health. And you look at what Harbaugh did in Baltimore. They utilized a plethora of different running backs. You knew that they wanted to make sure that was not just a complementary piece to Lamar Jackson, but if they wanted to put together, Moose, 8-9 play drives for 80 yards, they were capable, right, of doing that. And I think that mindset is what John Harbaugh wants to bring over. It's no coincidence. Greg Roman is on his staff, his former OC. He goes back to San Francisco 49ers days with John's brother Jim. What did they do there with Frank Gore? They pounded the heck out of the football. And the Giants adopted that blueprint last season. We saw it. It may have been in flashes, but I think based on the personnel, whether it's official or with respect to reports, they've got the items there to adopt that philosophy, and that being the branding of this year's coming team.
Well, I think, and Harbaugh, Lance, hit upon this in one of the interviews that he did month and a half ago. Actually, I think it was with Howard Eskin down in Philadelphia, right? Where he mentioned in terms of an offense being multiple. I think anytime, Lance, unless you're playing in a dome, right? And we know MetLife is not a dome. When you're in the Northeast, right? Growing up in this area, you talked about the fact of you're playing in the Northeast, you got to be able to run the football late in the season, right? It's one of those things. And it's a throwing league. We all see it. I mean, it's a throwing league. Look at the passing stats now as compared to 20 years ago in the National Football League. Look how much quarterbacks and wide receivers are making, what you can't do defensively in that defensive secondary. So you're going to throw it. It's not a matter of going out there and being able to minimize it. But the key in a good rush offense is this, can I run it when I know the defense knows I want to run the football? And that sets the tone. And when you can still run it, when that defense knows that you're going to run the football, then you're a good rush offense. So I don't think there's any doubt about it. I thought it was interesting, before free agency got going, after, Harbaugh was hired by the Giants to be their head coach is, what players from Baltimore were going to come over here? Because you want to bring guys in that are familiar with what you do as a head coach to kind of enact behind the scenes in that locker room on a day in, day out basis. Get the guys that aren't familiar with John Harbaugh and this staff a little bit more familiar. And we've seen, whether it be, those that are official, unofficial, but those that have agreed to deals, whether it be Likely, whether it be Stout, special teams, right? Yep. Obviously a bread and butter of John Harbaugh. He was a special teams coordinator for Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles. You look at Ricard, obviously that big fullback that's been a staple of Harbaugh down there in Baltimore. So you thought, you knew there were going to be some, and now you have an idea of exactly who they're going to be.
And don't overlook that special teams component, because a lot of these players have played on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that can go a long way. And the Giants had issues on special teams this past season, and field positioning, all of those things add up. No surprise, given Harbaugh's past, that was an ingredient that he wanted to address. And I think Likely is going to be somewhat similar to when the Giants, if you recall, Moose, went out and got Martellus Bennett.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good one, Texas A&M.
Yeah, here's the parallel that I want to build. Bennett was hidden behind Jason Witten in Dallas. And you knew he had the length, you knew he had the intangibles, just couldn't get on the field. Well, Likely has been behind Mark Andrews. And when Andrews has been hurt, Likely had his opportunities 2 years ago, very productive, nearly caught that game-winning touchdown, if you recall, in the opener against the Chiefs, where he was walking that tightrope in the back of the end zone.
His foot was a little smaller.
Correct, yeah. Just a tad. That toenail was way too big.
Right.
But
instead of a 13 and a half.
Yeah, those damn cleats. But if that now presents itself. Yeah. And granted, the Giants have Theo Johnson. I'm not saying that he's going to disappear, but there's at least more of a pathway for Likely to be the guy here compared to what occurred in Baltimore. So Bennett had a career year when he arrived on the scene with the Giants. There's the potential for Likely to duplicate that.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. And I think I think he and Theo Johnson are different. And I think they're going to be used different when you look at this offense. But he's also a guy that's a willing blocker too. It's not just a guy that's going to be a pass catching tight end, but he could stretch the field. When you're looking at what you can do from him in the seam, you can look at him and view him and use him in a lot of different ways. He's been good in limited opportunities with yards after the catch, Lance. So there's things to like in terms of when you look at Isaiah Likely and kind of you get into this conversation in free agency where am I paying for what the player was or am I going to pay for what the player potentially can be? Right? And sometimes you get into this with other older organizations that have won a lot, right? With guys that are a little up there in age. Like, what's my emotional commitment? They've won a lot of games for me. What am I willing to pay? Where is their game now? I think the Giants are paying Isaiah Likely for what he potentially can be. And given his physical traits and his attributes and what he can provide for this offense. Now, he's got to take advantage of it. He's got to stay healthy, and the Giants obviously have got to find a way to get him the ball, and that's the job of the offensive coordinator, Matt Nagy.
And one last thing that I wanted to add, you brought up an interesting point about bringing over players you're familiar with so that you can maybe instill what worked with
you
elsewhere.
See a lot of that. Yeah, you see a lot of that.
I was going to say Joe Shane and Brian Dable, and I'm not saying that, that worked out, but they brought over a lot of guys from Buffalo.
No doubt.
And that's a common element that you see, I think, across the NFL.
Well, and I go back to an example that where when Rex Ryan was hired by the Jets, coming over from the Baltimore Ravens, right? He brought over Jim Leonard for the safety. He brought over Bart Scott at linebacker, and I forget the defensive lineman that he brought over, but he brought over players from all three levels that knew exactly, that helps speed up the process in terms of what those players are going to try and learn defensively as well. Now, that's just looking from the defensive side of the ball. I think you have to have an understanding of what the culture is going to be here, and the quickly you instill that or get players up to speed in terms of what they can expect, I think the better off you're going to be as an organization.
We'll get into some of the free agent additions on the defensive side of the ball as we move forward here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Lance Medow, Marc Malusis with you. Let's open up the lines at 201-939-4513. We check in with Jeff on Long Island, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Jeff? What do you got for us?
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen. Just before my main point, I just want to say that there are 3 videos on thegiants.com that are really excellent, and those are the behind-the-scenes videos of the radio crew, the equipment crew, and especially the cafeteria. And I was just wondering if you guys have used the cafeteria lately.
Well, the cafeteria is currently under construction, Jeff, so it's impossible, literally, to walk in there.
That's funny. But my main point is, and I want to use a couple of keywords. One is availability, and the other one is off schedule versus scheduled. Now that Greg Roman is sort of the, I don't know, maybe he's the head guy in terms of establishing that really physical running game. I mean, obviously, it's a coordination of coaches and whatnot. My concern is availability, and I'm not talking about the running backs because we now have a plethora of running backs. My concern is with Jackson Dart. Because if history shows us anything, you can be an MVP of the league as a quarterback, but if you're not available for most of the season or an entire season, that MVP status really gets a little suspect. because you're not there to help your team. And I was thinking of Lamar Jackson in that case. And I'm hoping that Greg Roman doesn't have the same type of, whether they're scheduled plays or whatever you might want to call it, with Jackson Dart, because I really would like to see him on the field this coming season. What do you think?
Well, we'll let you go on that note, Jeff, and appreciate the phone call. It's an interesting question, and where I was going to go, the caller somewhat went, Moose, is you got to look at the track record and history of the coordinator and Harbaugh. They are coming from a team where the quarterback was a prevalent part of the run game. So for Harbaugh to come over after working with Lamar Jackson, see the skill set of Jackson Dart, and all of a sudden say, all right, we're just going to box him in and he's going to be a pure pocket passer, I personally find that very hard to believe. Roman also went with John's brother, Jim. He was with Justin Herbert, who's a big, strong QB.
Yeah, cut from granite.
He also takes off and runs. Now, very different physique, of course, than Dart, and Lamar is not the same as Dart. But once again, the common staples, and I'll throw out another one. When Roman was in San Francisco, he had Alex Smith.
Yeah.
And Alex Smith was another injury-plagued quarterback, and they didn't shy away from running him because of his mobility. So I get the concern of the caller, Moose, but they're going to have designed plays. They're going to have that component ready because that's today's NFL.
Right. Well, no question. And I think you want to make great use of the full athletic ability of the player. But let's not, Lance, I love Jackson Dart athletically. He's not Lamar Jackson as a runner.
Sure.
Right? And there were limitations to Alex Smith as a thrower when he was in San Francisco, right? So you have to kind of, he didn't have the greatest arm in the world, wasn't a big-time downfield threat, wasn't going to be able to air it out 50, 55 yards down the field with any kind of velocity, right? So there are no limitations when you're looking at Jackson Dart. I have no concern with them being able to use him in design runs. The concern with Dart is you can't take on tacklers. That's it. You got to be able to understand that you have to get down. It's bigger, faster, stronger in the National Football League. This isn't high school. It's not the SEC. And I think he learned that. I really do. Because guys are going to be coming at you from all different angles. And I understand the competitive nature, Lance, in order to fight for the last yard and all of that stuff. That's the... Yeah, I think you need to go through it. And I never played in the NFL, but guys that have, you need to kind of understand it and go through it and realize what you can and cannot do. But they're going to use them. They're going to run it. The question is in terms of, for Jackson Dart, is have the understanding of, I need to get down in order to play the next day. Taking on the tackler, taking an unnecessary hit when I don't need to for that extra yard just isn't worth it.
Well, the play in New England comes to mind.
No doubt.
Last season, right?
100%.
When you're on the sideline and you're trying to get 2 to 3 extra yards in the big picture, is that going to make or break your offense?
No, it's not. No. That's the point. And Lamar gets down. And listen, Lamar was, when he came out of Louisville, was an unbelievable player, right? He really was. And, you go back to the conversations at the time around him around the NFL draft, and obviously he's embarrassed a lot of talent evaluators in the NFL with what he has become as an NFL quarterback, right? And so, but there were limitations with him in the passing game early on to where before he really developed as a thrower. And before the weapons were put around him, like a Zay Flowers, like a Mark Andrews down there in Baltimore, and you've seen him develop as a thrower. When you look at Jackson Dart, he's not as athletically gifted as Lamar Jackson as a runner, but initially, in terms of in his first year, he's a significantly better thrower of the football than Lamar Jackson was. Now, the question is, this offensive staff has to put everything together for Jackson Dart. And to the play of the caller's point is, in order to be great, you got to be available. What made Eli Manning an all-time great New York Giant, and potentially, at one point in time, I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer, is that he played all the time. He never got hurt.
Yeah, and that is a luxury, even to this day, in terms of all these generations and decades that have gone by. You're bound to be without your quarterback, but if you can say, hey, I can pen in my guy for 17 games a season, that changes the trajectory of your team. And if you do lose a player, and I'm glad you went there, because the one thing that I thought Baltimore did actually effectively, it may have not worked out wonders all the time, but the Ravens, once they moved on from Flacco, Moose, they brought in a quarterback that skill set wise,
no question,
matched Lamar, meaning they didn't have to completely revamp their offense. And I know Jameis is in-house, and Jameis is not a statue, but he is very different than Dart in terms of athleticism, although after what we saw him haul in a catch last season, I don't know. Maybe we need to revisit that.
And a great Selly in the end zone as well.
100%. So I don't know.
Point.
I may need to reevaluate my perspective from that standpoint. But getting back to the point, I liked what Harbaugh did in Baltimore, where earlier in his tenure, he may have had a quarterback that was the complete opposite of what Lamar was. But then Tyler Huntley came in, and at least there was that mobility factor that complemented what they ran with Jackson.
Right. Similar in nature. You want to bring it, look at what Washington, who their backup quarterback is. Their starting quarterback, Jaden Daniels. Before they drafted Jaden Daniels, they signed Marcus Mariota.
Sure.
Similar in nature, right?
And he had to fill in for him.
And he had to fill in for him. So you're not changing it. To play your point, Lance, is you never want to have a backup quarterback that is decidedly different than what your starting quarterback is, because then it's too much change. You're not going to be able to orchestrate that. So you can't go from a quarterback that's a dual threat quarterback to then all of a sudden your backup is, hey, he's a statue, he's a pure pocket passer. That's too much change. That doesn't work.
Let's head back to the lines. We got Rich in Virginia with us here on BBKO. What's happening, Rich?
Good afternoon, Lance and Moose. Actually, I'm in Florida. I want to welcome.
We won't judge you, even though we said Virginia. It's okay.
You're working with a tremendous team there, and this show, in my opinion, is the best for us old diehard Giant fans, especially for somebody like me who goes back to 1961 before you guys are even embryos. So welcome aboard. It's great to have you on board. Lance, I totally agree with your analysis of Evan Neal and what they've done, and same thing goes for Tay Banks. I think both of them need to, count their blessings that they're working for the Giants and need to kiss John Harbaugh's shoes, because how often in life do you get second and third chances at things? There's obviously talent there with both these kids, and it hasn't worked out. So now they got a clean slate. Worst thing can happen, they're not going to make the team, but they got a shot. And I just hope, I put trust in the new coaching staff that they just fix their technique issues and, let them compete for a job, and let's see what happens. So I'm just happy what's going on. We have some other holes to fill, but I trust Harbaugh and his staff.
All right, Rich. Well, we appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring. Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly warming up a little bit here, so hopefully we can get some of that southern weather.
When I just drive over here, it was hailing.
Yeah, that's why.
It's not. Yesterday was beautiful. It was like 75 degrees. Today we're back in winter. It's unbelievable.
This back and forth, this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I can only take so much of it. I mean, Mother Nature. Can you be a little bit more decisive?
No, it cannot be.
I mean, I don't think anyone in Florida right now cares much about our stresses here in the New Jersey area. But
Rich is calling us looking out at the at the beach and the waves.
Correct. Yeah. Pearson, you going to add something? I know you had an itchy finger there.
That's the quickest I've seen 22 inches of snow melt in my life.
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's great, though.
Believe it or not, though, I'm amazed after that 70-degree day, there is still a small pile of snow in the parking area of MetLife Stadium. Do you believe that?
No, I didn't notice that.
It could survive a nuclear bomb out there.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
Well, I think, you need to prioritize.
See, you're the guy that you're focusing on the negative. I'm focusing on the positive. All the other snow is gone. Lance is focused on the one pile of snow that's still there.
I'm wondering how it survived. To your point, the stretch of 60
because it was probably like 10 feet tall at one point in time.
True,
but it was probably like a mountain. It looked like a small building, and now it's basically more than just a little speed bump. You're like, well, it's still there.
I'm impressed. You haven't viewed it, but your description was somewhat on point.
Oh, was it?
A small house is a very nice description. I thought there was an area for a window, a little kitchen, and I think you sold the picture.
There you go.
I certainly appreciate it from that standpoint. One thing, real quick. Yeah. I understand the caller brought up Tay Banks. Banks, though, a little bit different, still on a rookie contract. Yeah. So, not to say that they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, but the Giants then have to make a decision with Banks, especially if you're Harbaugh. You're on a rookie contract. You're not putting a great deal of strain on the cap. With Neal, his contract expired, but it still holds true to be what you said, and I'm paraphrasing, it's low risk, high potential reward. You're bringing him back in the mix when you have an expanded 90-man roster, and same thing with anybody else they may bring back who didn't have an overwhelming role. Why not let the new coaching staff evaluate them?
Yeah.
And you're not signing them on the dotted line and guaranteeing that they're going to be here once the regular season starts.
Well, Lance, we just got through the NFL scouting combine. What does that do? That grades out the athleticism of guys coming out of college, right? NFL teams, not just the New York Giants, but teams across the National Football League, for guys that have not figured it out as of yet, right? But are athletically gifted enough, they're always going to gamble on them. It's not going to be a big financial commitment, but all of a sudden we can unlock them, we can find it, whatever it might be. That's what, until it becomes a point where they just can't play, right? And we're not at that point yet with Evan Neal, but Evan Neal athletically, it still shows the characteristics and traits to be an offensive lineman in the National Football League. The question is, will he ever figure it out? And the Giants decided for a one-year gamble. Let's see what he's got.
Let's head back to the lines. Let's check in with Nick in New Jersey on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Nick?
What's up, guys? How are you?
What's
Doing
up,
well.
Nick?
What do you got for us?
Yeah, just wanted to first off rewind to your point on the sample size of Neal. I get he hasn't had any sample size at guard training. Last season he was a healthy stretch, whatever. But we've seen what he is at the tackle position. I just can't go another training camp watching Evan Neal at the tackle position, considering we just retained Illumino. I think we have a good swing tackle in Bo right now. So I really don't want to mess around with that tackle position. If this guy has a chance of making the 53, he has to get kicked inside and compete with whatever we do there at right guard, whether it's in the next few weeks or on April 25th.
Nick, I'll just jump in. I would agree with your assessment, and I'll let Moose explain his perspective. I don't think you have much to worry about with respect to the tackle. Now, this is my personal opinion. We haven't heard from Harbaugh or members of the coaching staff since Neal was officially re-signed. But, I mean, the fact that you outlined Bo exists, still a young up-and-coming player, he could very well be the swing tackle. It would make sense, given they don't have a starting right guard as it stands right now, that I would think Neal was brought back, Moose, to compete at the guard interior position.
Yeah, competition is king. I mean, I don't think you have to worry, Nick, about Evan Neal competing at the tackle position. There's nothing to compete for as long as everyone stays healthy. And even as a swing tackle, I think it's pointing toward Marcus Bo. But you look at a scenario here where they're going to take an opportunity to see if he can stay healthy. If he gets it, if this new coaching staff can unlock him, but I think it's more toward the interior than it is on the outside.
Absolutely, and I originally thought there was no way this guy was going to be back, but really looking into the deal, I mean, his rookie deal was 4 for $24, and now he's making 1 for $1.3, whatever the veteran minimum is. So you can't really hate on it. He'll be here for the summer. It's not guaranteed he's going to be here in September. But main point I wanted to bring up is the draft. I think we can confidently stay on draft day at 5. Whatever we walk away with at 5, whether it's those 4 Ohio State guys, we trade back. Maybe Bailey falls to 5 and Cincinnati wants to come up and give us that 3 back. And then we take Delane or someone over there. I think 5 is – we're going to be pretty happy as Giants fans. The main thing we have to worry about is 37. In the past, we have not been a good high second-round drafting team. Newbin, I wouldn't consider a home run pick there. Will Hernandez, Don Michael Schmitz, just not home runs at that spot. And for us to plug these holes that we have on this team right now, we're going to that pick has to be nailed. And a couple guys I'm looking at, I doubt he falls to 37, but the guard from Penn State, Omar Cooper from Indiana, and the 3 technique from Texas Tech, Lee Hunter. I think those 3 guys would fit what we're trying to do here. Cooper can play. Not that he's going to be playing if we took him, not that he would be playing in the slot much, but he could play outside the numbers as well. Lee Hunter is a good supplement to Dexter and Darius Alexander, and yeah, the Penn State guard, I just don't see him being at 37.
Yeah, I don't see him being there either.
Run to the podium type pick in that slot.
Nick, they might have you making that selection if he's sitting there with the 37th overall pick. I don't, he might be I think he might be the best interior offensive lineman in the draft when you look at the Penn State guard. I don't see him sitting there at 37th overall, but I would agree with you if he is a sprint run. If he's there late in the first round, it might be an opportunity where potentially you move back into the first round to go out there and get him. But you're not wrong. Yep. I mean, the whole point of the exercise of free agency is not only, Lance, improving the talent on your team, but not going into draft night where you have this glaring need that you need to address. The Giants are coming out of free agency where there are things to improve on. There's no doubt about it. But say, for argument's sake, you lost Jermaine Illuminor in free agency, right? And all of a sudden now you don't have a starting right tackle. And the other options in free agency aren't all that good. And then all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, I'm looking at my draft board differently with the 5th overall selection because I need to draft a guy that I think can be a plug-and-play right tackle for me year one for John Harbaugh. That's not the case here for the Giants. I think you're sitting there, and I think Nick laid it out perfectly where there presents options here for Joe Schoen and company come NFL draft night to where you could be flexible. You could move back. You could decide to let the best player available sit in there with the 5th overall selection, but you're going to get a quality player regardless.
And that's what Joe Schoen has mentioned in passing previously. And Nick, we'll let you go. Appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring. He's always said you never want to get to the draft, as you were insinuating, where you're forced to go in a specific direction. And you look at, once again, we'll combine players that are official and players that are pending physical. They've addressed the offensive line. We talked about the tight end position, the fullback position, linebacker, some corners/safeties. They've already sprinkled personnel across the board. Now, I'm not saying that all of these guys are going to make the roster, and I'm not saying that all of them are going to play high volume of snaps, but as you're constructing your roster heading into the spring, they're having more of an equal opportunist philosophy where they haven't overly emphasized one facet of the team compared to another that I think top 5 pick, you should be able to take who you think could make the biggest impact year one. And remember, this is a bit of an uncharted territory for John Harbaugh. Moose, he doesn't pick this high when he's been in Baltimore.
18 years, right.
When you look at some of the examples, there's not to say that they align with who's available and who's in the mix for the Giants. And the last caller brought up 37. And, I don't like to get ahead of ourselves just because it's hard to project who's going to be on the board at that point. But I will say an overarching theme, and I've brought this up over the years, if the Giants do want to take the next step, you need to build your team through multiple draft classes coming in and contributing. And where I think they have fallen short at times is, okay, you may get flashes from the first round, but the second round, the fourth round, maybe a year here, a year there, but not enough where what you can rely on out of that personnel year in and year out. So this is yet another class they'll add to the mix. And yes, they need players that could come in day one and leave their mark on this team.
Yeah, no question. Get second-year contracts. I mean, how many times you look back on
without a doubt.
Not second year, but
second contract.
Second contract with teams, right?
The next go-around.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and NFL, kind of grade out draft classes based on that, right? How many of those guys are getting the second go-around with the particular organization that drafted them? Yeah, you no doubt about it. You build your depth for your team through the NFL draft. You can't do it through free agency. It's too expensive. So you address areas, you go out there, get high-impact players, you have capital to go out there and play for, you're trying to win. Parity's the word in the National Football League. Any given year, you can see massive turnaround change. You saw it in Chicago, Jacksonville, New England this past year, Lance. So you look at the Giants here, they're going into it to where, as Harbaugh and company, we're drafting, if we sit there 5th overall, not to steal a line from Dave Gettleman, but Harbaugh repeated it, our goal is to draft a player that potentially at the end of his career is going to be putting a gold jacket on. That's why you're sitting there with the 5th overall pick, to have that caliber of player, and we'll see exactly who's sitting there for the New York Giants when they draft 5th overall.
I'm looking at some of the second-round picks that the Giants have made in recent history, and the caller ran through a few. One name that was not brought up, and I'm going back a little bit in time, and this is even pre-Joe Schoen, but you go back to 2021, Moose, and Azeez Ojulari was their second-round pick. And, unfortunately, he dealt with injuries, but just think, in opposite world where Ojulari stays healthy and gives you the pass rushing numbers consistently, 7-8 sacks a year, that disruptive force. I'm not saying that the Giants would be in a much different place, but at least that changes the dynamics of what they were working with up front over the last few
no
years.
question about it. I think Wink was on record talking about Ojulari, thought he was his best, most gifted natural pass rusher on the team. The problem is, Lance, you hit upon it, he couldn't stay healthy, couldn't stay on the field. I mean, that's been the issue with Azeez Ojulari. It's not that he can't physically play the game. His body just does not hold up.
And then, coincidentally, Aaron Robinson was the third-round pick that year, another guy that could not stay healthy. I mean, even Ellerson Smith, the fourth-round pick, those three guys, I mean, think about that. That was the second, third, and fourth-round picks in 2021, and the common element with all three was injuries and the inability to stay on the field.
Right, and the thing when you look back at, Baltimore, and I understand it was Ozzie Newsome, Eric DeCosta, and you look at that group, their ability to go out there, even though they didn't have high draft choices, to be able to take advantage of opportunities, right? When Kyle Hamilton is sitting there, and a lot of people are like, how do you draft a safety? And you look at what Kyle Hamilton can do defensively and how he can be all over the field and how he's a big-time playmaker and how offenses looking have to make sure and take account of exactly where he is on the field. Baltimore has done a really nice job historically. I understand there's been some regime changes and, offensive, defensive mindset, but over the years, they've done a really nice job of being able to target guys, find guys, even later on in rounds, and develop those guys to where all of a sudden they become starters for them.
I'm glad you're running through these names. I just brought up the Ravens draft history. You mentioned Kyle Hamilton. Think about this 2022 class for the Ravens, and now the connections that they have to the Giants. So Hamilton was a first-round pick. Then they took Tyler Linderbaum later on in the first round. Okay, now he just left in free agency to go to the Raiders.
And he dropped because he had small, short arms, right? I believe it was. Wrestler growing up.
That is accurate. Yes. Yep. So those two guys, we know they left their mark. I mean, Travis Jones, the defensive tackle of the third round, not a bad pick. And then two guys that, according to reports, are coming to the Giants, Jordan Stout, the punter in the fourth round, and they took Isaiah Likely in the fourth round as well.
Good draft.
Right? I mean, that's five guys we just ran through, and you're not going to hit 100%. And they had a number of picks that year, but to walk away with five players who you could say over the course of the 4 years that you had them, or maybe the fifth year with the team option, that at least you can rely on year in and year out, or added to depth, help special teams. That's how you build up a nucleus of guys that you can rely on in the event you lose your top line players.
Plus, you want guys that are starters that are not making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that can help your team that aren't making a ton of money in a salary cap world, especially when you come to the era where eventually you have to pay the quarterback, right? And you hope you get to that point here with Jackson Dart, right? Where he stays healthy, he stays upright. The potential we saw year number one, that potential is realized, and I believe it will be, but he's a true franchise quarterback, right? And I think that's exactly what we're on the verge of witnessing here, Lance. Well, after his rookie deal is over, you're going to have to pay him. And, they're starting quarterbacks in the NFL. We just saw Daniel Jones re-sign with the Indianapolis Colts. He got 2 years, $88 million with the potential of making $100 million, right? So, I mean, you're in when those guys start to get paid, it becomes more and more difficult on front offices to be able to put their team together. And then you have to start to make tough choices like we've seen out in Kansas City this year with the trade they had to make with the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, and Seattle, too, has lost a number of free agents.
No doubt.
Not the equivalent situation in terms of the quarterback, but good teams, they lose personnel. And how do they then maintain where they are? They draft well so that next group of players comes up and takes some of those starting positions so they don't have to fill every void through free agency that Moose mentioned, because realistically, that can't be done. Let's head back to the lines. We got Jessica in Connecticut with us. Welcome aboard, Jessica. What do you got for us?
Hi, good afternoon, Moose. Good afternoon, Lance. How are you?
What's
Doing
up,
well.
Jessica?
Oh, just living the dream. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to talk about, why isn't anyone talking about the signing of Isaiah Hodgins? I think that was such a great move on the Giants' part. I was so happy that he came back. I think he's an underrated player.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. Hodgins came back middle of last season after he had a productive first stint. He's a bigger wide receiver, which is, I think, what you were hitting on. So he offers something a little bit different than what they currently have on the roster. And they also brought back another name I'll throw out while we're on the topic, Gunnar Olszewski, which I thought was good to have him back in the mix as a potential return man and also a player that took advantage of limited opportunities at wide receiver throughout his career. And towards the tail end of last season, they needed him based on the numbers game, and he made some plays down the field. So you're going to need that, and it goes to the point of what Moose and I were just talking about, Jessica, the depth situation. Everybody's not going to stay healthy. Neighbors is coming off a significant injury. We don't know what his status is going to be in the early stages of the season, and we knew some of the wide receivers in free agency were going to demand a nice penny or two, so they weren't going to necessarily take the money they saved with Wan'Dale Robinson and start all of a sudden throwing that around. I think the Giants are going to be in position, Moose, to, if they want to go after a wide receiver in the top 5,
yeah, they'll
have that flexibility to add to some of the established veterans they have right now on the roster.
That's what I was also thinking. Maybe they would throw Gunnar Olszewski in as like a slot receiver.
Not a bad one.
Possible.
I mean, Jessica, that's not a bad one. I think you're going to look at all options here. I don't know if that's necessarily that would be at the top of the list, but you could also look at it and say, well, you know, the Giants, with the addition of Isaiah Likely and Hodgins coming back, where, yes, I'd like to address wide receiver. I don't know if I necessarily need to draft him 5th overall. You've got 18 to 19 wide receivers coming in this draft class that are probably ranked in the top 100 NFL draft prospects. Maybe one of those wide receivers are sitting there with the 37th overall pick, where you are playing to the strength of this draft class. So you can go a variety of different ways here if you're the New York Giants, and that's exactly what you want to do. But when you look at that receiver room on the whole, big time key number one is that Malik Neighbors is back to being the receiver he was before he tore his ACL.
That's true. Well, thank you guys so much for taking my call. Have a great day.
Same to you, Jessica. Appreciate the phone call.
I was looking at because I wanted to harken back. You brought up the Ravens draft class, right? The Chiefs draft class in 2022. Right, interesting one when you look back. Their first pick was who they just traded, the corner they just traded to the Rams.
Watson? No, not that was the other guy that left at free agency. McDuffie.
Right,
you're referring
to. Watson was a 7th round pick. Think about that. Jalen Watson was a 7th round pick, and he just got a 3-year, $51 million deal from the Los Angeles Rams with $34 million guaranteed. But that's hitting a home run, right? When you're looking at 2 starting cornerbacks, one you draft in the 1st round, one you draft in the 7th round, and Jalen Watson eventually but Trent McDuffie is the one that got traded to the Los Angeles Rams. But that was a really good draft class. If you could look back on that 20, now they missed on Sky Moore. Yeah, they missed on Sky Moore, but Leon Chenal, they drafted a number of guys on that team that ended up being players for that team.
Great draft class. Karlaftis was a first-round pick, and then Pacheco was another 7th rounder with Watson that year.
Yes.
Out of Rutgers. So, he has had some injuries, but at least was a productive running back while they were making Super Bowl runs. So when you find those gems late in the draft, boy, can that do wonders for you, and you avoid having to spend money elsewhere. And we're not just talking about punters and kickers. We're talking about cornerbacks and running backs. One other thing that I wanted to hit on, and you had hit on it, and the caller, I think, opened this door. And this is something for, I think, Giants fans and our viewers and our listeners to understand. You got to go back to what Harbaugh preached and how they constructed the roster. So I'll use last season, and this is no way me poo-pooing on the Baltimore receiving corps. Right. I want to make this clear, okay? But let's be realistic, okay?
Yeah. I like when people say poo-pooing.
I like it. Well, I'm glad. Listen, my job was to fulfill your wishes at some point. No, over the course of this program. I'm expanding my vocabulary and appeasing to Marc Malusis.
No doubt. I appreciate that. You're Mr. NYU.
There we go. We're all about the alphabet on today's show. I like it. It's a nice theme. We're working it back. We started with it. We're mixing it in the middle of the show. We'll somehow find a way to close shop with it, too. So Mark Andrews was a huge component and a huge target, right? If you just look at the distribution of who Lamar Jackson went with the football. Mark Andrews was 2nd on the team behind Zay Flowers, 70. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that they may very well be building around my point about if Likely is the Martellus Bennett of this year's roster and Theo Johnson, maybe there's a bigger emphasis on tight end targets, using them with the running backs to move the ball as opposed to the home runs with the wide receivers. Not to say that Malik Neighbors won't be invested, but after Zay Flowers, who had 86 receptions and 118 targets, the next guy on the list, Moose, was DeAndre Hopkins. Think about the disparity. 22 receptions and
targets?
39 targets.
Oh, my God.
I mean, think about that. 118 to 39. Rashad Bateman, 19 catches, 38 targets. And I'm not taking a shot. Hopkins, we know, is at the tail end of his career. Bateman, I think, has been a bit of a disappointment.
No doubt.
Since he was drafted.
Flowers is a stud.
No, Flowers has come through. But if you then apply that logic, Moose, and just work with me here with the Giants, okay, Malik Neighbors is your Zay Flowers.
Yeah.
Now, likely is your star-studded potential targeted tight end with Theo Johnson still very much in the equation. And then you've got some of the running backs that you're going to utilize even in the receiving game. Have they proven the capacity to do that, especially Tyrone Tracy? I'm not saying there's not a need, but would I be surprised if the Giants say, for this year's roster, those are going to be the components, and we're not going to be caught up in getting 2 or 3 wide receivers that we're going to force feed the football?
I would agree with that. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think you harken back to the numbers with the Ravens. I think there's also a trust factor, right? Where, there was, there's a trust in Flowers, and clearly there's a trust in Mark Andrews. And then you're looking at some receivers, obviously, at the tail end of their career, like you mentioned about DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah, I don't think this is I don't think we're in a scenario here with the way that the Giants conceivably can use Isaiah Likely, where there is not this unbelievable need where we need to address a wide receiver early, because he is physically gifted enough to be able to handle playing in the slot, or when you're using 2 tight end sets. And I'm excited to see, in terms of, kind of the matchup nightmare that Isaiah Likely and Theo Johnson can present. Both are physically different. Both are physically large young men. We know that. Theo Johnson has shown you a propensity to get open. The issue with Theo Johnson is he's got to hold on to the football. And the catches that are there to be made, he's got to go out there and make, because if it becomes a point here where he continues to drop the football, then the football's not going to come his way. And so that we've seen that in other areas across and with other teams in the National Football League. But he still has that opportunity. I think Likely is going to be a guy where I think the Giants feel like they can maximize his potential, and nobody knows that better than the guy that coached him down in Baltimore and is going to continue to coach him here in New York with the Giants.
Now, there was once a time where Harbaugh, he relied on the Anquan Boldens and the Derek Mason. So I'm not saying that he never emphasized wide receivers, but if you look at probably the last decade that he was with the Ravens, it was more tight end, running back oriented, and maybe they had one wide receiver that was prevalent in the attack.
Right. I mean, Ray Rice. You think about to be able to go out there and run the football. You think about, one of the big catches in Ravens history, God rest his soul, Jacoby Jones out in Denver when Flacco
good
was the
return man too.
Good return man, right? Yep. So you look at all those things, I think they're going to be multiple. Lance, I don't think this is going to be a case where it's, this is the one pathway we're going to go down. I think they want to go out there and run it. I think they want to be able to throw the football. Phil Simms talks about it time and time again. If you're not pushing the ball deep down the field 3 to 4 times a game, you're doing your offense a disservice, especially in today's day and age of pass interference. So I think there's going to be that aspect of it. And you've got guys like Neighbors and Slayton that begin to be able to go out there and get the ball deep. Now you've got a pair of tight ends that can work the middle part of the field, and clearly any running back that's coming into the National Football League, you got to be able to run it, but you also have to be a threat as a receiver coming out of the backfield as well.
Let's head back to the lines. Mike is in Connecticut with us. What's happening, Mike?
Oh, hi. Good afternoon. So right now, I believe the Giants' biggest problem is their receiving core. I don't think it's as good as the end of last year right now with the loss of Bellinger and Wandell. As far as Malik Neighbors is concerned, according to the expert orthopedic surgeons, with an injury like an ACL and a meniscus repair, it requires 12 to 15 months. Malik had his surgery at the end of October, so he's not going to be available for the month of September. So right now, your number one receiver is Slayton. That's unacceptable. He's like a number 3.
Well,
And
well, first off, I mean, we can go down. We understand the importance.
With regard to the draft.
Yeah. We appreciate the call. We'll let you continue on the draft here, but in terms of Neighbors, I'm not going to medically guess when Malik Neighbors is going to be back on the field. You hear him speak about it during the course of the offseason. You hear from a lot of athletes that are going through not necessarily the same surgery he did, but number of surgeries where it's a long, prolonged rehab. Lance, is everyone's ahead of the schedule, right? Until they're not, right? So you hear that time and time again, right?
Well, I mean, as if a player's going to admit,
right.
oh, yeah, I'm going to be out the first 4 weeks of the season.
Everything you've heard from Malik has been good. And so we'll see exactly when I'm more concerned in terms of when he does return, what version of Malik Neighbors are we going to get? They're not all that long ago. It used to take guys, more than that, not just to get back on the field, but to get all the way back. It used to take him a little bit more time. It seems like now with obviously the advancement in modern medicine that it doesn't take that much longer, but every athlete's a little bit different. So if you get the 100%, if he doesn't play in September, he's there in October and he's all the way back to being the player that he is or that he was before the surgery, you'll sign on the dotted line. No one's debating that the Giants could use, Lance and I were just talking about it. You could go Tate 5th overall potentially, the receiver out of Ohio State. That is on the board, even with him running a 4.5 440 at the Indianapolis Scouting Combine. So that's a potential there. Or you could address the receiver with the top end of the second round with the 37th overall selection. I don't think the room is good enough right now, but I think the room is far from being finished.
Yeah, it's an incomplete picture, so I think it's extremely premature. I'll go based on what the last caller said. I understand you're judging it and you're saying, well, based on the tail end of last season to now, well, you took Wan'Dale Robinson and Daniel Bellinger out of the equation, to your point, and Robinson was your leading receiver. He was your most targeted wideout, and Bellinger, made some flashes down the field, but you brought in Likely, who Moose and I have been talking about, who has real high upside and I think is an overall better athlete than Bellinger. So it's going to be intriguing to see what they can do with him. And that could be a replacement and then some for Bellinger. And yeah, right now at the slot position, it's a wait and see type of thing. But that 5th overall pick could be a very strong asset to go there. Or as Moose said, maybe utilize a 2nd round pick, a mid-round pick on a wide receiver.
Yeah.
I don't think things have dramatically changed where the Giants have taken a huge direction elsewhere in terms of the receiving core when they could still add a veteran in the free agent market and they could still very well draft a wide receiver. I don't see the dynamic shifting that much as it stands right now.
Lance, would you rather have questions at receiver or questions at quarterback?
Oh, without a doubt, I'd rather have questions at receiver.
Yeah, no doubt, right? So you look into it, and if I've got a true franchise quarterback, I understand you can't go out there and then, he's not gonna be a miracle worker, right? But if I've got a true franchise quarterback, and I believe Jackson Dart is that, he makes everyone around him better. Right. And so, talent is talent. No one's telling you that the room is, doesn't need, a younger piece or another piece to go along with Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, and you throw Isaiah Hodgins and Gunner into the mix that they're going to add. I firmly believe the Giants and the personnel staff at some point this offseason, whether it be the draft or somebody shakes free, they will add another individual to that room. But I've also got a quarterback that I believe is going to make everyone around him better. And so I've got the quarterback, the most important position in all of sports. I've got the solution there. You've been searching for that answer. The Giants have got that answer. Now it's a matter of putting the right pieces around him. And clearly, receiver is going to be an option potentially with that 5th overall pick.
And you always want to say to a defensive coordinator when they're studying your team, all right, who cannot damage this game? Who can we not afford to have that happen? And Neighbors, without any hesitation, is the first player that any opposing defensive coordinator against the Giants is going to point to. So if Neighbors is not in the equation, are the rest of just the names putting the fear of God in the eyes of defensive coordinators? My answer would be no. Okay, we're not naive, but when you bring the quarterback into the dialogue, Moose, this is why, and I'll circle back to a conversation we had earlier, where I don't see Harbaugh and Roman completely saying they wouldn't tap into the running ability of Jackson Dart, because the way to then get defensive coordinator to shift in terms of their thinking is now we got to account for the running back or the quarterback taking off at any given moment. And that helps offset perhaps what a number 1 or 2 wide receiver would pose to the opposition.
Love, yeah, no doubt, 100%, echo that. And, to kind of hammer that point home, like you want to bring up an example of another NFL team, right? So, for argument's sake, the Minnesota Vikings. I've got Hockenson at tight end. I've got Justin Jefferson at wide receiver. I've got Addison at the other wide receiver. I don't have a quarterback that can get him the football. I mean, that's a problem. So, you can look at it and say to yourself, right? And so, you've got J.J. McCarthy, who has not developed, potentially maybe Kirk Cousins land. I haven't seen the latest one, Kyler Murray. We'll see exactly. Both of those guys were let go from their respective organizations, the Atlanta Falcons and obviously the Arizona Cardinals, as both those franchises are going in different directions. And we'll see about the health of Penix down there in Atlanta, Lance. But I could have great weapons. If I don't have the quarterback to get him the football, it doesn't matter. Right, so I've got the quarterback. Now I've got to figure out in terms of the right pieces around him to make this offense go out there and sing.
And that was very similar in terms of the approach of what they did in Baltimore once they got Lamar.
Yeah.
They completely changed the offense with Greg Roman when they went from Flacco to Lamar. And we've talked about some of the pieces they have surrounded him with. So would I be stunned or shocked if that perhaps is the focus? No. Not at all. I mean, that probably is the philosophy, especially when you knew the Giants were entering free agency with limited financial resources to begin with because they had to open up some cap space. So you'd have to really stretch things thin if you thought they were going to go for a big splash specifically at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, and that's a little bit more of a case of if you're buttoned up in a lot of different other areas where you're looking at that receiver as being the kind of the cherry on the top. That's the finishing piece, right? In terms of putting that, the championship team together. We're not at that stage there with the Giants. I mean, that's just being open and honest. And the Giants hope to be a playoff contender in 2026. John Harbaugh has talked about that, right? And you look at this regime change. So the biggest key, Lance, we kicked off the conversation today right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live talking about the return of Jermaine Illuminor, who met with the media right before we hopped on the airwaves today. The offensive line is a huge key for any offense in the National Football League. And right now, as we sit here and we're chatting on this Thursday, is 4/5 of that offensive line, for the most part, is figured out. Now you got to figure out one other piece. And that was an offensive line that was a really good group, effective group in 2025.
And we'll leave you on this note with respect to Jermaine Illuminor. If you have not seen the press conference, I don't believe it's been posted yet. Jermaine Illuminor was wearing a suit.
The suit was a talking point.
That was a huge talking point.
Sorry to jump you, Lance.
No, it's okay. Listen, we were foaming at the mouth prior to the show over the questioning pertaining to the suit. So I couldn't let the show
fabric
expire.
Was the suit?
Yeah.
What fabric? Is that just a jacket, or are you wearing shorts underneath that?
Oh, there was a lot of speculation down under, and I'll leave it at that for Giants fans, the diehards, to listen in. But Jermaine Illuminor was wearing a suit, so if you see headlines tomorrow, you'll understand where it's coming from. We did not want you to have a restless night sleeping through the ins and outs of Giants free agency. All right, that is going to wrap things up for us here on Thursday. Moose, a pleasure, man. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Great job.
Absolutely.
Love working
Stay locked. You got it. To Giants.com for all the latest. Is today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants, and the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast, as we've been broadcasting from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. For Marc Malusis, I'm Lance Medow, signing off on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We'll speak to you on Friday right here on Giants.com. Have a good one.